And that led to empathy toward Donald Trump and actually helped him garner more support for this election. But in regard to his speech, I think that what Trump does really well is he actually listens to the concerns of the American people. Polling for years indicated that the majority of Americans were concerned about inflation, concerned about undocumented immigration. And while the Democrats tend to think that this strategy of denying and pretending it doesn't happen or isn't happening is somehow a successful strategy.
Anna Kasparian just sent shockwaves through the political world with a fiery takedown of the woke left on live TV. In a no-holds-barred debate, she exposed the Democratic Party's biggest failures, ripping into progressives for prioritizing identity politics over real issues like inflation, immigration, and crime. In a moment no one saw coming, she even acknowledged Donald Trump's successes, further fueling the controversy. Has Kasparian just delivered the wake-up call the left has been avoiding? Or is this the breaking point where traditional liberals finally separate from the radical agenda? Let's dive into her explosive statements and what they mean for the future of politics.
Being dispassionate about it and fair-minded, you would say, actually, Trump could be a pretty good guy. There's another side to him, which we all know, which can be more complicated. He trash talks people in a way that people don't like. He does stuff which winds people up, and so on and so on. And he has some policies which are awful, as all presidents do. How do you best describe him, Elizabeth, to people who don't really get him? You spend a lot of time around him. How do you see him?
There's a lot to unpack there. Number one, my apologies for the faces. My husband always says I don't have a poker face, and I guess that is coming out right now. Look, to start, I have spent quite a bit of time with Donald Trump. I think the best way to describe him is authentic, right? He's a real human being, and with that comes jokes you may not like. You may witness a few actions you don't like, but he's also real. He's honest. He tells the American people how he feels. He says it like it is. And despite what anyone thinks about him, the American people obviously disagree, right? Because he just became the president of the United States. So you can call him every name in the book, but millions of Americans obviously disagree and just decided he should be president of the United States. So I think that's where we can leave that. I think when it comes to claiming that Donald Trump is going to go after his political opponents, it's laughable considering what we just witnessed for the last few years, considering what I have seen on the sidelines happen to President Trump himself, happen to his family, who I know very well, happen to his staff, happen to people like me. I haven't talked about it. I've kept quiet waiting for today, right? Waiting for Donald Trump to get sworn in. But they went after me too. They went after my family too. This DOJ wanted to crush any opposition that they had because they were so terrified of Donald Trump being as popular as they knew that he was, and the moment that we all witnessed today, Donald Trump becoming president. Again, the fact is he stood there, said he would not go after his political opponents, was sworn in today in front of a crowd of people, many of which not only hoped that he would spend the remainder of his life in prison, but worked to make that happen. And he said he was not going to do the same thing to anyone else. You can lie about it all you want. That is not what he said. And I cannot wait for him to prove everybody wrong and be the president the American people deserve for the next 4 years.
He couldn't have been clearer. And honestly, Joe, the irony of saying that this was all something that Trump's bears when he's literally been the victim of this for the last year in the most unprecedented manner. When you take a president of the United States, I'm going to say this one more time, through a criminal court for the first time ever, that it's ever happened. And the reason you do it is because he may or may not have had a one-night stand with a porn star nearly 20 years ago and shuffled a bit of paper about it. It's a humiliating day for not just him and his family, but for America, for the American justice system, for the American presidential system. It was an absolute joke to drag Trump through a criminal court for such a pathetic and petty case like that. And if that had happened to a Democrat, by the way, you'd have all led the charge of how outrageous it was. Let me bring in Anna Kasparian on this. I mean, Anna, the sense I got watching Trump today is the sense I've got from speaking to him quite a lot in the last few months. I've had 5 or 6 conversations with him since he got shot. And I've definitely detected a man who is unbelievably grateful to be alive, that he genuinely understands he came within half an inch of death, And very nearly it happened again a few weeks later in the golf course, which was another appalling failure by the Secret Service. So he feels that very strongly. And I think that would affect any human being, anyone. But secondly, he feels the hand of history. He hasn't got a campaign anymore. All he's got left now is to deliver on his big promises.
Working class Americans. Her sharp critiques have sparked intense debate, with some praising her for speaking truth to power, while others accuse her of abandoning progressive principles. Kasparian's willingness to challenge the Democratic Party's narrative and even acknowledge certain conservative arguments suggests a growing divide between traditional liberals and the more radical wing of the left. Is this a sign of a broader shift in progressive politics, or is Kasparian simply voicing frustrations that many on the left have been afraid to admit? Her transformation raises critical questions about the future direction of the Democratic Party and whether it can reclaim the trust of disillusioned voters. At how Kasparian's evolving stance reflects a broader reckoning within progressive circles. Like Russell Brand and Joe Rogan, she has challenged the mainstream left's reluctance to address real-world concerns, sparking debate over whether her shift is rooted in genuine ideological change or strategic repositioning. Some see her as a courageous truth-teller unafraid to challenge the party's failures, while others view her as opportunistic, adapting her rhetoric to align with a disillusioned audience. Regardless of the motivation, Kasparian's break from the radical left highlights a growing divide that could reshape Democratic politics heading into the next election. Will this rift lead to meaningful reform, or is it a sign of deeper fragmentation within the left?
I mean, I hope your interpretation is correct. I mean, obviously, being the target of an assassination not once but twice is a traumatic situation to experience, and maybe it changed him to some extent. But I do want to just quickly go back to the points made in regard to the investigations. I really hope that Trump doesn't waste his time in his last term focusing on retaliation against his political opponents. So we're going to have to wait and see about that. I largely agree in regard to Alvin Bragg's prosecution of Donald Trump as it pertains to, his extramarital affairs with adult actresses. I like that you're giving him the benefit of the doubt, but don't be a cheeky little devil, you. Okay, you know that he had an affair. That's why the hush money payments were paid. But I think that investigation and prosecution really paled in comparison to the classified documents case and the attempt to overturn the 2020 presidential election. I think the timing of the prosecution by Democrats in those two cases were very much political, and that led to empathy toward Donald Trump and actually helped him garner more support for this election. But in regard to his speech, I think that what Trump does really well is he actually listens to the concerns of the American people. Polling for years indicated that the majority of Americans were concerned about inflation, concerned about undocumented immigration. And while the Democrats tend to think that this strategy of denying and pretending it doesn't happen or isn't happening is somehow a successful strategy, he pays attention to what people are concerned about and he speaks to those issues. And I really hope that this is a teachable moment for the Democratic Party. So far, I've seen them refuse to take any personal responsibility for their failures and foibles.
I don't think they've learned, honestly.
Cycle.
Yeah, honestly, and I don't see any evidence so far that Democrats have learned a damn thing. I really don't. I've been seeing some of the stuff you've been saying, which is the right way to go. And Cenk Uygur as well has been saying similar stuff, which is, look, you have to recognize what's happened here. And you have to understand American people just did not buy into anything that were being sold by the Democrats. In fact, they just moved in big numbers from all Democratic groups.
Millions who feel ignored by the political establishment. While his critics accuse him of exploiting grievances for political gain, his supporters see him as a rare figure who actually listens to their concerns. Meanwhile, Democrats risk further alienating working-class voters by focusing on issues that many perceive as disconnected from their daily struggles. As the next election approaches, the question isn't just whether Trump can make a comeback. It's whether the Democratic Party can bridge the growing divide between its elite leadership and the everyday Americans who feel left behind. Politics. His resilience in the face of relentless opposition has only strengthened his grip on the Republican base, solidifying his status as a political force unlike any other. While Democrats and the media continue to attack him, they may inadvertently fuel his appeal, reinforcing the idea that he is fighting not just for himself, but for the millions who feel unheard. As the 2024 election looms, the real question is whether his unshakable connection with voters will be enough to propel him back into the White House, or if his legal battles and political controversies will finally catch up with him. One thing is certain: love him or hate him, Trump remains the most dominant and polarizing figure in American politics.
I can imagine a lot of cheering around America when they heard that. Just a bit of clarity on such an absurd debate. Well, we got to a stage where you had the President of the United States and his Vice President, Biden and Harris, both endorsing the obviously grotesquely unfair scenario of biological males who identify as trans women competing in women's sport and then beginning to dominate women's sport in a way they never did when they competed against men. And that alone, as someone like me, who's basically more liberal than not, pretty much a centrist, but it was so ridiculously absurd.
To address the struggles of everyday Americans and instead fuels resentment among those who feel their concerns are being ignored. While progressives champion these causes as part of a broader social justice agenda, many voters, especially working class and independent ones, see them as distractions from more pressing economic and security issues. Rather than tackling inflation, the housing crisis, or rising crime, Democratic leaders continue to pour energy into ideological battles that alienate the very people they need to win elections. The debate over transgender athletes, for example, may be a priority for activists, but it hardly ranks among the top concerns of most Americans trying to make ends meet. This growing disconnect between the Democratic Party and mainstream voters could have serious political consequences. As frustration mounts, more moderates and independents may abandon the party altogether, leaving Democrats increasingly reliant on a shrinking base of progressive activists. If they fail to recalibrate their priorities, they risk further electoral losses and possibly handing power back to a Republican Party eager to capitalize on their missteps. Platform that prioritizes the needs of working-class Americans rather than catering to elite progressive activists. But so far, Democratic leaders seem unwilling or unable to course correct. The shift in voter sentiment is becoming undeniable. Hispanic voters, once a stronghold for Democrats, are increasingly leaning conservative, driven by concerns over border security and the economy. Young men, disillusioned by progressive policies that they see as out of touch with their realities, are also moving toward Trump. Meanwhile, working-class voters, regardless of race, feel abandoned by a party that once championed their interests but now appears more focused on symbolic social issues than tangible economic relief. The irony is that voices like Anna Kasparian's aren't coming from the right. They're coming from within the left itself. She, along with other disillusioned liberals, is warning that the Democratic Party's current strategy is a losing one. If Democrats refuse to listen and fail to pivot back toward the economic and security concerns of everyday Americans, they may find themselves facing a political realignment that hands Trump, or another Republican candidate, an even stronger mandate in the next election. The message is clear. If Democrats want to win elections, they need to focus on the real concerns of everyday Americans: rising costs, crime, and border security, rather than assuming progressive activism alone will carry them to victory. But here's the reality. Republicans are counting on them to ignore this warning. As long as Democrats continue prioritizing identity politics over kitchen table issues, they're paving the way for Trump and the GOP to dominate in 2024 and beyond. What do you think? Is the Democratic Party making a critical miscalculation, or will they wake up before it's too late? Let us know in the comments, and thanks for watching.